Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. So I've had a few questions from a number of different subscribers about Firas Zahabi. He's a very famous MMA coach, one of the most successful MMA coaches of our time. The trainer of Georges Saint Pierre, one of the greatest fighters of our time. And what a lot of people don't know is that Firas Zahabi makes some very controversial statements from time to time that go against conventional wisdom as far as combat sports goes. For example, a couple of years ago he shook the world of jiu-jitsu when he said jiu-jitsu practitioners are terrible athletes. And if you take that quote out of context, I can see why a lot of people got mad. But if you hear him out, read the entire article he wrote about that, it's a phenomenal piece of literature, if you will. And some time ago, he made a video where he said, skipping rope is junk training. And that made a lot of people angry as well, the ones who heard only that soundbite without the context. And recently he said, hitting pads is unnecessary. And a lot of people blew up with that, like, what? Hitting pads? Shouldn't everybody hit pads? That's like what you do. You go to a combat sports gym, you hit the bag, you shadow box, you hit the pads, it's just part of the process. And if you listen to everything he said in context, yeah, it makes perfect sense. In the context of what he said, yeah, he's 100% right. You don't need to hit the pads in addition to all this other stuff if you are training correctly. That's a very important if. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about where the value of hitting pads lies. Now, what Firas was referring to was, do you need to hit the pads, like do 3 rounds on the pads every day in addition to your bag work and your sparring and your heavy bag work? I already said that. Shadow boxing as well, right? Do you need a mitt holder? Do you need that guy? Do you need to hire a professional mitt holder to be a great professional fighter? And his answer was no. So what is the role of holding mitts? All right, I've found a couple of reasons to do it, and they're a little bit different, actually a whole lot different, than what most people think. I find when I teach my students to hold mitts, and I'll do this early, and I will do it often, teach my students to hold mitts for each other. It helps them to overcome the flinch reflex that can hold them back. There are 3 things we naturally do in a fight. Our natural fighting instincts are terrible for winning fights. They're good for survival. Here's why. Our natural instincts are either to get away from the danger, to run away, or to push the danger away from us, or to hold on to the danger as tightly as we can to try to mitigate the damage. Now, I'm not talking about our other potential responses, such as freezing or submission or anything like that, in addition to fight or flight. I'm talking about fighting responses, our natural instinctive fighting responses. Move away from the danger, hug that danger really tight, or push the danger away. Okay? And the flinch reflex is a combination of push the danger away and try to get away from it. So when we see a punch come at us, somebody swings an arm at us, our instinct is to put our arms up in between us. And a lot of reality-based self-defense guys have these whole diatribes about how they try to capitalize on that reflex. And there may be something to that, who knows? I haven't really invested a lot of time in that because I'm in combat sports. I'm not a self-defense guru. But what holding pads does is it allows a student or an athlete to see that punch coming at them at full speed, at full power, and to intercept it in a way in which they will not get hurt. And that can translate into technique as well. For example, catching a punch, parrying a punch, blocking a kick, catching a kick. All of these things can be incorporated into fighting. I had this great coach, a guy named Chanan Sinsub. He was a Lumpini Boxing Stadium champion from Thailand. Guy had some unreal number of fights, like 360 something fights. And he had an interesting way of holding pads. Some people will call it numbers like 1, 2, 3, and so on. You know, corresponding to certain strikes. Kick, kick, knee, elbow, whatever, right? Everybody holds pads differently. But when he first held the pads for me, I said, so what's your system? Are you going to call out numbers? Are you going to say like jab, kick, or whatever? He's like, no, just punch, kick, do whatever you want. I'll catch it. I was like, what? That I must have misunderstood you. He's like, no, just punch, kick. Punch at me, kick at me, try to hit me in the face, try to hit me in the body, try to kick me in the leg. I'll catch it. And so I took him at his word. I tried to punch him in the face. Boom. Catches it with the pad. Tried to hook him. Boom. Catches it with the pad. I throw a full combination. Pa, 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 pa. He catches them all. Throw a kick. Boom. Catches it. This guy had some great reflexes. And I thought, wow, there's something to learn right there. Something to learn right there about fighting from pad holding. So what I'm saying is you can actually learn a lot more about fighting from holding pads than from hitting them. That's what I'm getting at here. That's the real value of pad holding, is that it teaches the pad holder more. Have you ever noticed how the coach or the teacher or the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu professor or whoever's teaching the class is almost always the best guy in the class? As far as Jiu-Jitsu goes, the Jiu-Jitsu instructor is usually the best athlete, the best at rolling. Maybe he's not the most athletic, but he's the best at tapping people out. He has everybody's number there. He's got everybody figured out. You go into a Muay Thai class or a kickboxing class or the boxing class, and the boxing coach is usually the best guy in the room. Usually, not always. Sometimes you have an older guy who, you know, he's retired a long time back and he can't physically keep up with the younger guys, but back in his day, maybe he could. Or maybe not. But he's a good coach. But usually, what I'm getting at, the coach is often the best guy in the room. Why is that? Is it because he was such a badass fighter? Not always. Is it because he's a super athlete? Not always. Man, especially with jiu-jitsu, sometimes you'll see these skinny little guys that look like wimps, and, you know, they're legitimate black belt badasses who can tap everybody in the room. The same goes for boxing. I had this great boxing coach, a guy named Chris Chen here from China, and he's a skinny dude. Dude looks like a beanpole. But this dude could fight, and he could box, and he would spar with everybody at the end of class and just work circles around everyone, tag them at will. So why are these guys the best ones in the class? Is it because they have more experience? Well, yeah, but it's a very specific type of experience. Pad holding is part of that. As far as boxing and Muay Thai and any other ring sport go, pad holding is a big part of that. Because they get all of this exposure, all of this experience of interacting with full contact strikes without taking damage, and mitigating those strikes, and catching those strikes, and parrying those strikes, and deflecting those strikes, which is essentially what the pads teach you to do. As far as jiu-jitsu goes, essentially what you have is this guy who is pretty good at jiu-jitsu, and he's almost always rolling with guys who are much less experienced than him. And yet, when these guys go and they roll with other black belts, they're still competitive. How does that work? See this a lot. A black belt rolls with a bunch of white belts or blue belts. Doesn't really have a bunch of high-level training partners, but they can still compete at a high level. How does that work? And I'll tell you why. It is specifically because they are training with those less experienced guys, so they can rep out technique in gross repetitions. And they can see all of these attacks coming in a similar but importantly different way than holding pads, if you will, to the point where it becomes predictable. So, pad holding, apart from teaching you stuff about fighting, teaching you to retrain your flinch reflex into something useful for winning fights as opposed to merely surviving. Because that's what it is. It's a survival instinct. Put something in between you and the danger, right? Pad holding can be a useful coaching and teaching tool. So, how do you teach people a combination? Well, a heavy bag isn't always the best way to do it. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not, because the heavy bag is stationary. A pad holder can move around. A pad holder can throw something back at you, give you a reason to slip and move your head, and bob and weave, and counterpunch, and throw that cross as a counter to the jab, and so on. So a pad holder should be teaching you something, in my opinion. On the receiving end, the pad holder is learning something, but he's also giving something back. So it should be a two-way street there. But yeah, what do I think of Firaz's assessment? Do we need to hold pads? Do we need to hit pads like 3 rounds a day? I mean, great. If you like that, do it. When I first heard him say this, like, you don't need to hit pads, my gut wrench reaction was, what? But. And I thought about it for a minute, and I realized, since I've been coaching, I've done very little pad hitting and a whole lot of pad holding. And as a result, I've become a much, much, much more technical fighter. Much more technical than when I was spending a great deal of time hitting the pads. So there's something to that. There is something to think about. I love the fact that Firas Zahabi challenges conventional wisdom. I think we should all question everything. Absolutely everything. I mean, man, to me that is one of the tenets of my religion, to question everything. Yeah, I'm going to bring up religion right here in this question of pad holding and whatnot. But yeah, that is something my religion teaches. Question everything. And that surprises people because they're like, what? Don't you have a pretty questionable religion? I suppose I might. But that's the thing. Question everything. Don't just take anything for granted. Yeah. So, if you don't know any better, I mean, conventional wisdom, it'll teach you some lessons. Sometimes it'll teach you what not to do. But question it. Because if we don't ask the questions, we will never find the answers. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.